Okay, hi everyone. Welcome to our webinar today on Let Kids Play. Thank you to tuning in. We're going to be talking about the role of unstructured play on child and youth well-being. My name is Kayla McMillan. I'm the current chair of the OSPAF Executive. The webinar today is held in partnership between the Ontario Public Health Association and the Ontario Society of Physical Activity Promoters in Public Health. So I just want to go over a couple housekeeping items before we get started. So the webinar is going to be recorded, and you can find it on OPHA's YouTube page. Also, a PDF of the webinar slides are available on the file pod on the left-hand side of the screen. So of your webinar, there should be a left-hand side, and there should be a little taskbar that says Files. Under that, you should be able to download the webinar slides and share them as you would like. Also, please note that all the participant lines are muted, and if you have any questions throughout the presentation or at the end of the presentation, please enter them into the chat box, and we will do our best to answer them during the question period. We have set aside about 15 minutes at the end for questions so that you can address any of the presenters at that time. Okay, so let's get started. So just a little bit about OSPAF before we start. So we are the Ontario Society of Physical Activity Promoters in Public Health. We aim to be the unified voice representing public health practitioners with the mandate of promoting physical activity in their respective communities. We build on the strengths of an established infrastructure and mandate within public health systems, as well as the partnerships formed at the community, provincial, and national levels with the ultimate purpose of increasing physical activity levels in Ontario. So our vision is really for a healthy Ontario that supports physical activity for all throughout public health leadership, and our mission is to elevate physical activity as a public health priority through advocacy, capacity building, engagement, and collaboration. As we just talked about, these are kind of our 4 goals, and I just wanted to highlight the third one there, so to build capacity for physical activity health or physical activity promotion in public health, which is really why we wanted to start doing these webinars in partnership with OPHA. And we've identified some topic areas of interest, like unstructured play, like the webinar today, to offer some webinars throughout the year to help build capacity for physical activity-related topics. Our next webinar in the winter will actually focus on active transportation planning, which will explore the relationship, mandates, and roles of different stakeholders in active transportation planning with professionals from public health, tourism, and recreation. So stay tuned for that. But for now, let's shift back to the topic of today's webinar. So again, today's webinar is going to focus on the benefits of children spending time outdoors, being physically active, and engaging with nature. So really around the role of unstructured play on child and youth well-being. Through the webinar, health professionals will learn about the evidence and research that supports unstructured play outdoors, which connects children and youth with nature. In addition, tools available to support schools and municipalities are going to be discussed during this webinar today as well. And you'll hear from 2 Ontario Public Health units who are involved in this work, as well as from CPHA regarding a recently released position statement on children's unstructured play. So quick overview of the agenda. So the webinar is going to be about an hour, and we should wrap up at about 2:30. We're going to start with a little welcome and introduction, which I just provided, go into a bit of the evidence around unstructured play, which will be presented by Sherry Diaz from Simcoe Muskoka District Health Unit. And then we're going to move on to unstructured play put into practice, and Monique Beneteau from Peterborough Public Health will talk about that. And finally, we'll wrap up with some more information from Frank Welsh at the Canadian Public Health Association on their position statement on unstructured play. So again, I'll just remind you at the end of all of this, we will have time for questions so that you can ask any of the presenters anything that you have. Any questions that you do have at the end, just type into the chat box. So I will pass it over to Sherry to talk about her work at Simcoe Muskoka District Health Unit.
Great. Thank you, Kale. Advance this slide. Thank you very much for having me today. I'm happy to be participating in this webinar. Just a little bit of an introduction for myself. I've been working as a public health nurse with the Simcoe-Muskoka District Health Unit now for about 17 years. Most of this time I've been with the Chronic Disease Prevention Program. And in part of my role, it includes working with a variety of stakeholders, including community and municipal partners, workplaces and schools. Essentially, we're looking to build community capacity and create healthy public policies and supportive environments, amongst other things, but to increase physical activity and decrease sedentary behavior. Today, my presentation will revolve around a rapid evidence review that our team completed back in 2016, and it relates to school ground greening. So a little bit of context before we got into school ground greening. Our health unit has been focused on supporting the development of healthy communities for many years. In 2007, the built environment and health became a strategic priority for our agency, and since then there's been a growing body of evidence and awareness of the impact of the built environment. Our built environment work has mainly involved working with the 26 municipalities in our region. We participate on committees. We provide input to healthy public policies, land use planning policies, such as official plans and other master plans. So by 2012, we had gained a considerable amount of sort of knowledge and some skills in working in partnership with our community on the built environment when the Canadian report cards on the levels of physical activity for children and youth started highlighting the importance of active play in the outdoors. As we know, Canadian children were repeatedly receiving a failing grade for their overall levels of physical activity, and for the first time in 2015, the report card took a stand on play and nature in the outdoors with its risks, and of course the development of the position statement on active outdoor play. So many of you probably remember that this report card positioned the importance of outdoor play as essential because kids are more active when they're outside. In addition, with ready access to unsupervised outdoor play, kids have better developed motor skills, social behavior, independence, and conflict resolution skills. The position statement included 2 systematic reviews to examine the best available scientific evidence on the effect of outdoor and risky active play. And for some of us, this was the first time that we were hearing this term, risky play. One of the recommendations in the 2015 report card was for schools to choose natural elements over prefabricated playgrounds and paved areas. Since it was our interest and mandate to work with schools and school boards to influence the development of policy and create supportive environments to address physical activity, we felt the need to take a closer look at schoolyards from a built and natural environment perspective, especially because children and youth spend so much of their waking hours in this environment. We were also aware at the time that many of our local schoolyards were lacking shade trees and natural green space elements. Our school climate surveys at the time also indicated that students wanted more shade trees. So later in 2015, we decided to conduct a rapid review of the evidence to answer this question: how does schoolyard greening or naturalization affect the health of school-aged children? And we focused on the elementary school ages of 4 to 12 years old. To make our rapid review manageable, though, we had to narrow the focus from looking at the overall health impacts to focus mainly on the physical activity impacts. We looked at studies pertaining to active play, physical literacy, sedentary behavior, and physical activity in general within the context of naturalized outdoor school settings. We had a total of 992 documents that resulted from our search, and after relevance assessment, we ended up with 17 studies that were appraised for their quality, and in the end, we ended up with 16 that were included in our review. It was anticipated that the findings from the review would not only inform potential public health strategies and interventions, but also be used to raise awareness among local schools and school boards to inform school ground greening plans, policies, and initiatives such as outdoor classrooms, as some of this was starting to occur. The review was completed and summarized into a written report in 2016 and added to our health unit website. It still is there. This is an example here of a photo of the cover page for both the highlights report and the full report, and you can see the URL is at the top there. So school ground greening is also often referred to as naturalization. It's a growing international movement aiming to improve the outdoor school environment. It involves transforming hard, barren expanses of turf and asphalt into places that include a variety of natural and built elements. This can include many things like forested areas, shade trees, shrubs and gardens, but also things like logs and stumps or large boulders for climbing, stepping stones, grassy berms, sort of hilly terrain, could be rock amphitheaters, wildflower meadows, and include things like loose parts, sand, twigs, pine cones, that sort of thing. So what did we learn? Well, we learned quite a bit, actually. Through our analysis, 5 themes emerged related to physical activity quality, diversity and quality of play, age and gender considerations, interest, ability and inclusiveness, as well as sedentary behavior. We saw many positive associations made between a naturalized school ground and child health and development. For example, in addition to providing shade and creating cooler, more comfortable outdoor school environments, naturalized school grounds represent a promising means of getting more children moving in ways that nurture all aspects of their health and development, not just their physical health, but their social and cognitive health as well. These spaces encourage children to play for longer periods of time at mainly light to moderate physical activity levels by providing a more welcoming setting with a diversity of spaces that better accommodate the play interests and abilities of all children. Some studies reveal that naturalized school grounds may contribute to maintaining physical activities among girls, younger and disadvantaged children, and those who are less inclined to participate in competitive rule-bound games. These children are often relegated to the sidelines, less engaged, and more sedentary. So making changes to the school ground space to accommodate the interests and needs of all students supports inclusivity and equity. So this is not about discounting the benefits that can come from open sports fields or tarmac games or traditional play structures for that matter, but they can provide value and including more naturalized elements is often overlooked. We also learned that naturalized school areas on school grounds have their ability to temper social dynamics of control and dominance, and they foster more civil and cooperative behavior. They provide a range of choices for play, such as non-competitive and open-ended play. And the addition of loose parts support longer engagement and cooperation during play and a wider variety of play behaviors. A variety of elements in the schoolyard encourages physical movement in self-directed and unstructured play. This builds physical literacy as children enjoy trying new things, testing their abilities, and developing confidence to be active in different environments. And we know that developing physical literacy helps children to be more active throughout life. So after completing and sharing our evidence review with local school boards, we developed a few resources to support our engagement with school communities, further awareness raising. Included here, starting from the left, we have a banner called The Natural Way for Kids to Play, Ask Why, Ask How, as well as in the middle there you'll see some bins of natural materials that we put together. It includes like river rock, pine cones, tree slices. We use them for school community events and interactive displays. We have a couple sets of them. And on the right is there's some bamboo poles there as well in the middle. And then on the right is a photo of the school event where students were playing with the materials as the public health nurse was speaking with the parents and the educators. We also developed this postcard. It includes key messages about making room for nature in the schoolyard and the importance of it. On the flip side, we describe how public health staff can support schools to develop naturalized school grounds. We provide presentations, tools, and resources, including curriculum ideas. We offer to participate on school communities to help establish a project committee or get a project underway. We can also assist to search for and apply for grants and funding and to bring other stakeholders to the table, especially given our relationship with others with the municipality in terms of planning and healthy community design. We're also in the process of working with our public school board to develop a school ground greening guidebook, which will be intended for school councils. This is a local school example. of a school ground greening project that we were invited to participate in. Our public school board engaged us and the local conservation authority to work in partnership with 4 schools on what they called the Schoolscaping project. It involved assisting the 4 schools to assess, plan, and implement a school ground greening project to either mitigate an existing environmental issue or create space that would support socioeconomically disadvantaged populations. This is one school we worked with that had an existing environmental issue. Their property included a large hill on one side that created a drainage and erosion problem. It was also a high traffic area and loved by the students as a snow hill in the winter time. The role of public health for this project was to bring in the physical activity perspective regarding the importance of ensuring this space could continue to be used by students to engage in active play. We also supported the project by identifying potential funding opportunities, and we applied for and successfully received a significant grant from Tree Canada, and the grant provided funding for the installation of shrubs and large caliper trees and the materials needed to plant and protect the trees. Students were very much engaged in this project and part of the project committee. The Conservation Authority organized the school site assessment pieces, which included a team of students mapping the schoolyard and gathering input about the schoolyard space from their peers. Teachers also received some professional development for curriculum ideas. As using the space for outdoor learning opportunities was also an area of interest that they identified. So here's the before and after change to this space. Schoolyard transformation included the installation of several species, especially native species of trees. I think it was over 70 shrubs. These large armor stones that help secure the ground in that area. And it included an outdoor classroom space and some benches. Additional components being considered in the future include a no-mow zone and a weather station. One of the advantages of school ground greening project is that it can start off being quite simple and just grow over time. It doesn't have to happen all at once. We also worked in partnership to support schools to develop gardens and orchards, as well as spaces that can be used for outdoor classrooms. So in conclusion, we acknowledge, as it was apparent in the evidence, that there are complex causes between environmental factors and human behavior, such as physical activity, that we don't fully understood, and this was evident in the literature as well, but we still do need to make the most of the free time that students have throughout the school day. And school grounds are an obvious setting where health, education, and environmental design issues overlap. And this space is worthy of our attention from a built and natural environment perspective. We also know that intersectoral collaboration, school community and student engagement is valuable, and that school site projects should be considering the health and physical activity needs of students in addition to their learning outcomes. Our evidence review report included a list of recommendations that fall under categories of planning and development, advocacy, education, and collaboration and policy, and these are some of the examples that were included. In terms of tools and resources, our evidence review included a fairly extensive list of resources that were mainly intended for schools, that included a list of videos and posters and policy considerations, but we've not gone back to update this list in our evidence review. And since then, there's been a growing amount of literature and resources developed by groups and organizations over the last few years. So what I've done is I've just gone and I've listed a lot of the key organizations who have relevant tools and resources. They're just listed there. One such organization is Outdoor Play Canada, whose team includes Dr. Mariana Bersoni. She's a researcher from British Columbia. Dr. Bersoni recently informed me that they are in the final stages of developing a risk-benefit assessment toolkit for outdoor play. It will soon be available for download from the Outdoor Play Canada website at no cost. The toolkit will support practitioners to encourage children's outdoor play to take a balanced approach to risk and safety. So for those of you who are interested, you may want to keep your eye out for this, and the URL is at the bottom of the slide. So I thank you for the opportunity, and I look forward to questions at the end of the webinar.
Perfect. We'll move on to the next slide and have Monique present.
Hey, thanks. So I'm Minik Benato. I'm a health promoter at Peterborough Public Health, and I've been here for about 16 years, juggling various projects and programs in that time. In the last 6 years or so, I've spent quite a bit of time thinking about outdoor play for children, and I will just get into the presentation to tell you what we've been doing and where we're going. You may hear some things that are similar to what Simcoe Muskoka's done and some of the evidence that they have found, which is great. It's validating. What I will do, though, is probably focus a bit more on our process of what got us started on this journey and then where we're planning to go in the next little while. I want to start with talking a bit about some of the playground injury data that we learned about, and then talk about how we've done this work, who we've engaged, and what we've learned around some of the best practices around outdoor play. And then I'll finish off by talking about some position statements that have really guided what our next steps will be. So it began in actually early 2013. We were looking at the Ontario Injury Data Report from 2012, which reports data from 2007 and 2009. And we saw that across all age categories, children in Peterborough made more visits for injuries from falls from playground equipment than the Ontario average by quite a wide margin. The data was flagged during our operational planning session. I was given the task of exploring it a bit more and determining some possible strategies for reducing those numbers. In the fall of 2013, I had 4 nursing students who were working with me. They conducted a narrow literature review that focused on the prevention strategies for reducing playground injuries as well as playground safety practices. From that review, the 4 best practices that came out really were that the equipment needs to be properly maintained, that the surface underneath that equipment needs to be able to withstand falls, that children are being properly supervised, and that they're using equipment intended for their age. They took this information and they created a playground safety checklist that included not just sort of your typical playground safety elements, but also things that we would be interested in public health, things like how much shade is in the area, whether or not there's evidence of cigarette smoking, that sort of thing. The students pilot tested the checklist with 6 different playgrounds, which included a mix of rural and urban, low and high income neighborhoods and these are some of the locations. I won't go into detail about what they found at each of them, but I will say that at every location that there were issues that needed some attention, some more than others, like the one on the right. There were rusty nails sticking out everywhere. So we shared what we had learned with recreational staff, and a colleague had convened people, municipal recreation people together to create this municipal access to recreation group. They were looking at access to rec policy work, but it was a great opportunity for us to come to them and have some conversations about what we were learning and talking about. We also engaged with some of our school board representatives, mostly the people involved with maintaining the facilities, and we spent quite a bit of time talking with them at different meetings. We organized, through the feedback we got from the Municipal Access to Recreation group, we found out that not every municipality had certified playground inspectors, and so we worked collaboratively with them to provide that training locally, and at that point we had then certified playground inspectors in every municipality. We also, once they had that training, we went back to another meeting and said, so based on that training, what have you decided that you're going to do with the playgrounds? They all agreed that their play spaces needed some attention, and they felt that having a checklist that might be a universal checklist for the whole city and county might be useful. So we started working with them on developing that checklist. We also heard from them that they were concerned about creating play spaces that were AODA compliant. So we organized another training session on creating accessible playgrounds. Over the course of the time that we were talking with them and working with them, I started realizing that our conversations were taking us away from talking about playground injuries to talking more broadly about what kind of play experiences we wanted to provide children. And that led to a much larger evidence review that I started doing, I think, in 2014, 2015. So quite similar to when Simcoe Muskoka was doing theirs. I probably reviewed over 100 articles. The information was synthesized. The key findings were put into this evidence review, and we published that in 2017. Now, I'm not going to go into a lot of detail about some of the findings, but these were some of the highlights that, by and large, probably most importantly, play is a human right. Article 31 of the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child speaks to a child's right to play. We also learned that diverse elements using universal principles and design principles encourages play from all children. They all have opportunities regardless of their level of abilities and their interests. That natural play spaces are more inclusive, gender neutral, and accessible. Simple adaptations like loose parts can enhance that play experience without being costly. We also learned a lot about risky play and had some interesting conversations around that term. Injuries will happen, and to borrow from Dr. Brusoni, really needing to think about being as safe as necessary rather than as safe as possible. And more recently, I just heard the term learning injuries, and I really like that term because it implies that there are certain injuries that are beneficial to children in terms of their growth and development. Really got the message about risk-benefit assessments, that there's been too much emphasis focused on what the risks are of letting children play, especially unstructured play, and that there are definite benefits to allowing them to play, and that really there are risks when we don't let them play in terms of sedentary behavior, poor physical literacy, poor social skills, those kinds of things. And lastly, we also really learned a lot about the fact that we need to engage with the people, the population who's going to be using that space, and working collaboratively to create and design spaces that will appeal to them. So before I go further, I wanted to take a pause and talk a bit about spatial equity. This is a term that we didn't include in the evidence review. I only heard about this term for the first time at the International Play Association's World Conference in 2017. While it's a new concept to us, it's a great fit given that public health's mandate is to focus on health equity. I don't think I'm going out on a limb to say that not all play spaces in neighborhoods are created equal, and that spatial equity is a way for us to think about these spaces in a different way. We couldn't find a really good definition or clear definition, so we did a brief literature review and came up with our own. So for our purposes, we're defining spatial equity as improving the health of residents and visitors, the physical environment, and the social environment. And that this happens by ensuring that a space is equitable when its use, size, configuration, amenities, upkeep, and spatial accessibility is fairly distributed across various socio-demographic characteristics. In other words, outdoor spaces are physically accessible, equitably distributed throughout a community, and the quality of those spaces are comparable regardless of the neighborhood. So back to the evidence review. Before we finalized it and published it, we felt that while it was an internal document to help guide our work, we knew that our community partners would probably want to see it. And so we invited 17 members from our community from 3 different sectors to a technical advisory committee meeting. The purpose of that session was to get feedback on the report and gauge their level of readiness in the community around moving this work forward, possibly through municipal and school policies. while the report didn't land on an actual position, our partners drew the conclusion that natural play environments are better for children. We got great enthusiasm from them, especially the education and community sectors. I will flag that our municipal partners were quite concerned about issues of liability and risk. In the end, the feedback we got was they didn't really want to create a position statement or policy, but if we created a position statement that they could endorse, that there would likely be more uptake. So we decided that our next step was to create a position statement. But then there were other position statements that were floating around. First, there was the National Position Statement on Active Outdoor Play that was released in 2015. In the spring of 2018, the Council of Chief Medical Officers of Health in Canada endorsed that position statement. And then this past March, CPHA released their position statement on unstructured play. So I'm going to speak a little bit more about each of these, not in a lot of detail, but just in how it's related to the work we're doing. So this position statement, I'm sure many people are aware of, was endorsed by several agencies, and we certainly included this one in our evidence review. Dr. Brusoni from the BC Injury Research and Prevention Unit was one of the people behind this position statement. She reviewed our technical report in 2017 and provided feedback on it. And through our correspondence, that's where I learned that the Council of Chief Medical Officers of Health in Canada had drafted an endorsement. It took them a year, but they did endorse it in April of 2018. The endorsement listed several recommendations, and this slide provides a theme for those most relevant to health. You know, it really speaks to a lot of the things we endorsed in our report too, the engagement piece, the making sure we identify benefits and risks, and that we are ensuring equitable access to play. So we didn't really feel that we needed to create a position statement since this one existed, and that we would focus our attention on how we might support these recommendations. In the meantime, projects that were funded by Lawson Foundation, including the project from the Canadian Public Health Association, produced the toolkit and the position statement on unstructured play. Just released this March. It doesn't just address play outside, but unstructured play indoors as well. And the quote on the slide says, you know, it recognizes that unstructured play as a child's right, a critical component to child and youth health and well-being, and that actions are necessary to reduce the barriers limiting opportunities for unstructured play at school and in the community. It's a comprehensive position statement, an excellent complement to the work that we've been doing, which is why we brought it forward to our Board of Health and asked them to endorse it, which they did in June. Since then, we've shared this position statement widely with our municipal elected officials and staff, school board elected officials and staff, and a lot of our key community partners. We've undergone some programming changes, which means we're regrouping to figure out our next steps. I think our direction will be to create a product that complements these position statements, as well as local documents like the City of Peterborough's new Park and Open Space Master Plan, which includes minimum requirements for neighborhood parks. So, you know, one of the ideas is to create a tool like a checklist or a guideline for healthy outdoor play spaces for children that can be used by people who are providing play experiences, like our parent councils for school play spaces and municipal partners. That's it for me.
Great, thanks a lot, Monique. And we will move on to Frank.
Hello, everyone. Hope you're having a great day. Hopefully it's a playful day also. My name is Frank Welsh. I'm Director of Policy with the Canadian Public Health Association, where I've been for about the last 6.5 years or so after a career with the Public Health Agency of Canada. The question is, what is a national organization like CPHA doing looking at children's play? Well, I'm going to stop and say, we didn't think of it ourselves. We have to rely on other folks. And what happened? There was this organization called the Lawson Foundation. who decided to establish funding for 3 years to support development of risky play, preferably outdoor risky play, within Canada, within the Canadian context. They even put in a reasonable sum of money, went through an extended process, and we were lucky enough to be one of 13 organizations that were funded by Lawson to actually focus on what play means and how we can improve children's access to play. One of the issues that is usually pointed to along the way is that over the last 4 or 5 generations, children's access to the outdoors and their ability to roam and play has become increasingly restricted. You go back to the 20s, kids could roam for 10 kilometers in a day, come back home when the lights were out, still have supper, and be an integral part of the family. A couple of generations later, that shrunk down to 1 kilometer. And now, for a lot of kids, particularly in urban areas, that's reduced even further to about 300 meters. What's happening is that because of that, they're losing their interaction with their peers. They aren't getting the same level of physicality, of physical activity, and with that, the capacity to understand risk and to address risk and how they behave, as well as other pieces. So with that, the question we were asked to look at was, why is that happening? And what can we do from a policy perspective, whether it be at the federal, provincial, or municipal level, to improve kids' access to play? So, being the folks we are, we jumped in and used that science-based policy approach and asked, what were we actually trying to do? Now, over the past couple of speakers, you've heard them refer to play, to risky play, to various descriptions of what play is. But we're settling in on a language that says kids need unstructured play, that they lead themselves. Here we go. So, what we have is unstructured child-led play where kids get out and play, enjoy life, stay outside. Parents can be in the background, but they don't actively participate. And it's important for a variety of reasons. What we can do is, as I mentioned, kids are playing less, so we have to get around that notion so that they can get out more, get out from under constant surveillance. Because when kids get out and play, they're actually doing the business of childhood. As Monique mentioned, the issue is that the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child has identified play as an integral right of the child, yet we keep taking that away. Also, if you look at it from a public health approach, the question is, if the goal of public health is to provide the tools for people to be the best they can be, and we're taking away the tool that kids use to become that, what are we doing to our society? And if you start actually looking at science behind it, you find that there are several key pieces that have to be, that play addresses. Looks at physical and gross motor skills, mental and emotional well-being, social health and teamwork. Because all of a sudden kids are out having to work with each other and do pieces to play. They also, what happens is when kids get out and do that, particularly before school programs and the like, they have improved learning capacity and attention at school. And that is core if we want kids to make the best use of those very limited minutes in education. And it gets a little tricky because you have this notion of play-based learning that's in many of the schools that's out there. But still, kids need that time at recess and before and after school to play independently amongst themselves so that they can come in and participate more effectively in that education. And the last thing that we have kids see is improvement in resilience and risk management skills. You know, it's funny, if you look at kids, and I don't watch them play, I have a couple of grandkids I watch out and play regularly. They're really good at self-regulating themselves when it comes to risk. They like to push themselves. They like to see if they're pushing their parents' buttons, but they will self-limit and pull themselves back. And that's what they have to learn in as part of play. So, if those are goals, how did we get from this notion of play is important to a toolkit? Now, we did 3 or 4 different things, some of which were very similar to the work that was done in the 2 municipalities, Muskoka, Simcoe, and Peterborough. What we did was do a lot of that basic research, injury prevention, skills development, learning, and ask some basic questions. And what we started seeing was that kids intrinsically know how to play, but parents keep putting in roadblocks that access play. And the question is, why is that happening? So we went out and conducted a series of semi-structured interviews with about 40 different people. And those people were the insurance industry, teachers, other educators, outdoor play specialists, risk management experts, play inspectors, or outdoor play space inspectors, those types of people, and asked them what the issues were that really limited kids' access to play. And the funny part in all of this stuff is when you went back and analyzed all that data, every one of them said that their best interest was in seeing the kids play well, have good experiences, and succeed. The attitude, what were the barriers? How do you overcome that? And what we started hearing from many of these different parties, they really didn't talk well together because they didn't have common language and they didn't have common understanding of their concerns. So through the help of a working group of representatives from all of these various parties that are interested in play, access to play, we're able to sort out some of the core issues that needed to be done. The word cloud from that work is up on your screen right now. But when you stop and started breaking them out, you came into the social aspect, where you have that parent who has perhaps had a child injured in a play experience, becoming very vocal to a decision maker and the influence that had. You also have some of the legal concerns that come up. You know, clearly, some of the insurance claims and risk assessments around those were thought to be problems. Policies, laws, guidelines, we all know what happens from a municipal setting versus a school-based setting. The fear of litigation, fear of being sued has resulted in a very risk-adverse. And the question is, how do we start mitigating some of that stuff? And then particularly in some of the inner city schools, the issue of cost comes up. You know, the playground work that was done in that Muskoka example was beautiful. And it would be great if that could be put into place in inner city schools, but often they don't have the funding. Also, that notion of a loose parts play, where kids can just come in and take stuff, bring it back perhaps, and parts getting lost, making replacements, all have financial consideration. So in your discussion, what I would suggest as you go forward, as you look at how to structure this stuff, you make sure you get all the right people in the room and then start having very open, safe discussions about what each other's concerns are, so that you can come through, break down what the actual issue is, and come forward it. Much like a community consultation model that you would use in various other pieces. So with all this information, oh yeah, we also went out and asked parents what they were most concerned about. You know, a lot of them told us they like to see their kids out playing independently, but were afraid of what the other parents would think of. So there has to be that discussion amongst parents. So how can what we were finding be addressed in a variety of tools that can influence policy? Well, what we did was start looking at the audience we had talked to and developed really 3 groups of tools. First one were a series of briefings that are really designed for either municipal or school board decision making that addresses the current state of the literature on a variety of subjects. And it's a matter of just finding the right subject to fit the situation. The second one was, how do you talk to parents? Or, yeah, whether they're in the municipal setting or in the local setting. So we developed a series of infographics that provide very clear, concise information, all based on our briefings and the literature available, that can be shared with whomever would like them. And then the third piece of information was to look at what types of discussions needed to happen in those decision venues and what kind of information do they need to ensure there's open, honest, safe discussions on the issue. So we've come up with a number of tools that can help inform that. You know, the duty of care checklist, the top of the list, really refers to what is the law and what are the actual requirements of those who are supervising kids at play. You want to get parents information to parents, we have a frequently asked questions available for you. And we've got a couple of policy tools, decision-making tools, all with the goal of how do you engage these very diverse groups of people who have interest in play to get to a decision that allows kids access to that unstructured play, that allows them to become the best they can be. And just to show that all of this can work, we cobbled together a series of, I think it's about 22 or 24 promising practices, both in school settings and in municipal settings, where communities have actually bit down and said that play is important to us from an organization, and we want to make sure kids have access to it. The types of practices you get range from very large municipalities such as the Calgary Play Charter approach to what goes on fostering play in Kentville, Nova Scotia, which has a really active program. So I encourage you to take a look at all of those things. Also in this batch of work, there are a number of wicked problems, issues that are going to be difficult to address. And we felt it important we bring these together and put them in a discussion paper that tries to coalesce the available information from a Canadian context and provide some recommendations on how we can proceed to, or what might be done to reduce those issues and challenges. The topics that you see on your screen are those that we felt were most important. You know, Canada is becoming a more diverse culture. We also have truth and reconciliation that we are learning how to integrate within our decision processes. And that's going to change how kids act. Also, the parents of those children, we have to understand their perceptions, how we view it. also legislation, liability, all those topics have to be addressed in one form or another. And the last piece I want to mention that was done is that notion of the position statement, which Monique referred to earlier, where we provide a context or a quick summary of the current situation and identify these recommendations to various levels of government and partners in play that can help them or help direct their work to improve access to play. So I am rapidly running out of time here. So I will quickly bound over, say that all our information is available on our website at the link on the slide. That link, find the resources section, go down to Healthy Children, and that is all the information I just talked about. Those infographics are the ones that are included in the package. So with that, I'd like to thank you for your attention and turn it over to our moderator.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much, Frank, Monique, and Sherry, for sharing your knowledge and learnings on children's unstructured play. So we are actually pretty much right on time, so thanks to all the presenters on that. And we are going to open up to questions from the participants. So we do have our first question, so I'm just going to read it out, and then the presenters can talk to it. So Ashley asked, what resource or key messages have been the most beneficial when working with school boards? I'm finding the principals of staff understand the importance of natural play, but the staff at the board level don't buy into it and keep investing their money in things that go against natural play, like AstroTurf. Can any of the presenters speak to that?
Hi, this is Frank. I may as well jump in. You know, you're quite right. There is that gap between what the school board or what the teachers and principals would like to do who are actually engaged with kids and the school board administrators may want to do. And that's, how do you overcome the issue of fear? We have taken a couple of roles. You've seen our things like our infographics, which are very tightly constructed information pieces being used to inform them of what the issues are. And I think what may happen in the very short run is as the risk-benefit assessment tool comes in, I'm hearing that it's already being picked up by Frank Callan, which is a very large insurance company that insures a number of municipalities and school boards. And as they move to acceptance of that tool, you'll start seeing that dynamic at the school board change, because all of a sudden the risk construct that they have to make their decision on is changing, because the people who charge to insure are saying, yeah, use this tool.
Hi, it's Sherry. I'd just like to add to that. For the most part, with the one school board that's mainly been active in partnering with us or us partnering with them to do some of these projects, it's been a champion at that school board. And it's also been, how do we meet them where they're at in terms of what their areas of priority are. So they identified that they were interested in outdoor classrooms and supporting educators with professional development opportunities. So we took advantage of any of those opportunities to be involved in those things and have attended events to support sort of the professional development of the educators in using that outdoor space, and then slowly sliding in some more of the messages around the importance of the unstructured play in the free time, as well as like I showed in that one example of that schoolyard. Immediately the conversation was leading to, let's just not allow the kids to use that hill because it's becoming quite dangerous and it's becoming, you know, not good in terms of the outcomes for the watershed and all of the things that were happening with the drainage issues. And we needed to sort of stop and say, okay, let's talk about this. You know, obviously this is a place that the children love to play, and it's so important for their physical literacy and their physical development and play, and needing to sort of remind of the benefits, to shift the conversation a little bit in that other direction, to look at other considerations. So it's looking at the health and wellness benefits of the students when making decisions about schoolyard design in addition to their learning outcomes. So shifting the conversation, meeting them where they're at, and participating in things that are our priority to them, and just trying to position things so that it helps them to understand how this meets their priorities and their mandate.
Yeah, and this is Monique in Peterborough. A couple of different things come to mind. To echo what Sherry said, at our separate school board level, there's a person at the school board who used to work in early childhood education, who is now there and has been instrumental in modifying their playground policy to include a component now about natural play environments. You know, also how to mitigate risks and sort of the not risky play, but that risk management piece when they're talking about natural play spaces. The other piece is you know, again, sort of meeting people where they're at and starting off small. I know that through our Keeping Kids Healthy program, or I think at the time it was Healthy Kids Community Challenge, that they, you know, purchased a number of items that could be part of a loose parts box, and worked with the schools to incorporate loose parts play, so that people could start thinking about play not just at the, you know, the manufactured equipment that's in the playground, but different ways of engaging in play. So starting small, where it's not very costly at all, and then using that as an opportunity to start talking about different other ways that they can do play differently in the school grounds. The other piece, more at a municipal level, but I suspect schools are the same way, is if I would love to know if anybody has any research evidence around the economic benefits of having the play spaces as opposed to the concrete. Like, I don't know, in terms of the cost of maintenance, because sometimes I think some of the things our play providers do, they pick things that are going to be easy to maintain and short-term possibly less costly, or more costly but down the road less costly. And I don't know if anybody's ever done some kind of a cost-benefit analysis around the different kinds of play structures to sort of speak to that financial aspect.
Yeah, interesting. So we have just another minute or two, so if there are any final questions, just a reminder to quickly type them into the chat box. I'll wait another 30 seconds or so, and if not, we will wrap up. I have put all of the contact information for the presenters up on the screen, so you can contact them independently if you have any questions. Also, a quick reminder that you can download the presentation slides just under the Files tab on the left-hand side of the screen as well, if you want to save those too. Okay, and it looks like we don't have any more questions left, so I think we can conclude the webinar. Thank you very much to all of our presenters, Sherry, Monique, and Frank, for taking the time to present on this. It's a really interesting topic that seems like it's getting more and more attention across public health units in Ontario, so definitely an emerging issue that has people interested. Thank you to all the participants who tuned in. That's great. Oh. We do have one quick question, just as I'm concluding. I don't even know if we have time. I think you might want to reach out to the presenters individually with your question about including comments in recreation master plans and what comments were included. But again, thank you to all of the presenters and all of the participants for tuning in.